Good, well I hope you've had the chance to have some good discussions on your tables. So just the first question, I'd love to hear what everyone thinks, so shout out some answers to these, but just start with the first one. What is justice? How do we decide what is just or unjust? What do people think?
Justice is that which is right.
That which is right, okay. Nice, very good. Anyone else?
We were talking about how different societies might think of different things as just or unjust.
Okay, so how it varies from society to society, yeah, brilliant. And then coming to the second question, is it unjust if someone is punished for something they didn't do? And then the opposite, is it unjust if someone is not punished for something they have done? What did people think?
Yes.
Nice, good, good, good. Did anyone say no?
We had a slight caveat to it.
Oh, go on, Jamie.
If someone's clearly remorseful or they really didn't mean to do it or something, then it would be just to give them a lesser sentence or treat them in a more favourable way. If they clearly didn't mean to or they're remorseful.
If it was by accident or they say that they're sorry. Nice, okay. And then just the final question, what about forgiveness? If someone does something wrong and they are simply forgiven, has justice been denied? This is obviously a deeper one, so I'll just take one or two responses on this one.
Yes.
Justice has been denied, thanks for that. Do you want to elaborate on that one, Daniel?
Well, if no one's punished, then...
If no one's punished, then there is no justice. Okay. Did anyone think, no, it's actually okay?
Yeah.
One from Steve over there. Was that...
Yeah, it is okay.
Okay, brilliant.
It's not injustice, it's non-justice as well. So it's
Okay.
mercy rather than justice.
Mercy, not justice, yeah.
So it's not suddenly injustice, it's just outside.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that, guys. I hope it was a good discussion on your tables.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those responses. It's really interesting to hear what you guys all think. But now I'd like to invite Mark up. And as you've probably heard from the past couple of evenings, Mark actually works for a charity that is involved in a lot of different countries across the world. And he has actually spent 20 years working in Southeast Asia. Most of those have been spent in Nepal, and he actually has a PhD in Nepalese studies, which is very interesting. So without further ado, Mark, take it away.
Thank you so much. You were going to ask me a question. So I was going to tell you a short story, right? You want
something interesting about yourself.
Okay, right, thank you. One of the things I do is I teach cultural competency, intercultural competency, helping people to learn to interact with people of different cultures sensitively. And so even from my early time in India and Nepal, I recognized that this is really important. I need to be sensitive to people. And one time I was with some friends visiting some Tibetan monks who lived in a refugee camp in north of India. And the abbot, the lead monk in that place, invited us for a chat and some drinks, some tea in his little house. Now, I knew, and I'd been told by my Indian friends, that pests are a big problem. Mice, rats and stuff, because they eat so much food that actually should be eaten by people. And while we were sitting down, there's about 10 of us maybe sitting around with this monk, and we were talking. I saw a little mouse scurry across the floor, and I thought, well, actually I didn't think. But I quickly picked up my rubber chappal, my flip-flop, and without thinking, I aimed it at the mouse, and somehow knocked it on the back of the head, such that it just bounced a foot up in the air and then landed on its back with its legs in the air. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? Tibetans don't kill animals. And here I am, I've just killed this mouse in this Tibetan's house who's just given us hospitality. What do I do? And I just kind of panicked, and I thought, well, I've got to do something about it. I can't just leave him there next to my rubber flip-flop. So I thought, well, okay, I kind of sneaked over there and picked it up, but then put the chappal back on my foot, and then I had to carry it out by its tail out in front of the monk. And that is one of so many stories I can tell you of how my own intercultural competence was pretty dire. But anyway, there's hope for us all. Right. So we're going to be looking at this topic of how can God be just and forgiving this evening. Now, over the recent years, we've been brought face to face with the ugliest sides of human nature. So we've seen, for example, a policeman putting his neck on a man in America who just happened to be black, not just happened to be black, and because of that egregious crime, squeezed the life out of that man. And it was such an ugly thing, wasn't it, that we all saw on our news feeds. But not only that, we then some years later, hear about this young lady who is abducted. First of all, she's arrested because she's not got a mask, and then she's abducted and then murdered in cold blood. And then we read about a young woman and her partner who then kill their own child. And it's just an awful thing, isn't it? We live in a pretty ugly world, really, don't we? And when we read those kind of things, we get angry, don't we? And it's right to be angry. It's right to be angry at injustice. But have you ever asked yourself the question, why is it right to be angry at injustice? How do I decide what is just and what is unjust, what is right and wrong? And furthermore, is there any hope of forgiveness for such people? Because it's not just the Derek Chauvins of the world, is it, who do crimes or do things which are unjust and wrong. When we're in our quietest moments and we think about ourselves, we reckon and recognize that we too have done things wrong. And then how will that injustice be repaid? Should we be punished too? Or can there be forgiveness for us? Sometimes a celebrity is found out to have committed some crime. And then there is a hue and cry on social media. And it's kind of nice sometimes, isn't it? And it kind of pulls at the basest elements, I think, of human nature. When we see our enemy is being shamed or has been cancelled because of something that they have done. But what about when it's your friend? Do you defend them? Do you say, well, that happens to anybody. These things that's just part of life. And what about when it's yourself? Is it so that once we're shamed, there's no way back? There's no way to be forgiven and truly counted as innocent? Forgiveness, not just grudging acceptance, but true innocence after guilt. Is that possible? We want to look this evening at the story of the crucifixion of Jesus. In earlier evenings, we looked at how do we make sense of our tradition by looking at how Jesus interacted with the religious leaders of his day and pointed out that really the matter of purity is a matter of the heart, not so much about our physical condition. And then we saw later on about how we can have inner peace, and that can come through an interaction and encounter with the Lord Jesus. And then yesterday we looked at how good is good enough, and we noticed that actually none of us is good enough to appeal to God to somehow forgive us on the basis of something we've done. But now I want to look at the crucifixion, because it's this story, on this story, the possibility of forgiveness while also justice is done becomes evident. Now in the Bible we read that God is always just. He's never unjust. But we also read that God is love. He's loving. So the question is, if God is just and loving, how does he deal with people who have not reached the mark, who have not maintained a pure 100% standard? There are three options open to God. One is he can overlook our failings. But the problem there is justice has been denied. Well, the second option is he could cancel us, punish us, just blot us out because of things that we've done, not just physically, but in our hearts. But that's to deny his love. But I want to suggest that there is a third way in which God can be both just and loving. And that's found here in this story of the crucifixion of Jesus. So the background is that Jesus has been teaching, preaching, healing people who are sick, but at the same time, while he's doing that, he's making enemies of the religious leaders because they don't like him. He threatens their power base, and ultimately they decide to get rid of him on trumped-up charges. And we're going to pick up the story. If you have your copies of Mark uncovered there, we're going to pick up the story at chapter 15 and verse 21, which is on page 84. Page 84, we're picking up the story at verse 21, where it says the crucifixion of Jesus. This is Mark's account of Jesus' life. And just in case you haven't been to any of the evenings so far, this is just one of 4 accounts that we find in the Bible of Jesus' life. So, I'm going to start reading here at verse 21. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. Now just let me pause here a second and just note here that Mark is including interesting journalistic detail in his story. And I think it's for this reason. He's saying this: if you want to have somebody else corroborate this account, all you have to do is go and find Simon of Cyrene or either of his sons, Alexander and Rufus, and they can tell you that this is a true account. But reading on, verse 22. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Don't forget, Mark is writing to people who are not familiar with Jerusalem and the geography and the culture of the people. That's why he explains the terms there. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It's interesting here that in this verse 24, and they crucified him, just 4 words in the English language. In the original Greek, it's just 3 words. And with those 3 or 4 words, he summarizes what they've just been doing, what these cruel Roman soldiers are doing in nailing him to the cross. 4 words. It doesn't take a film of 3 hours long to explain exactly what's happened to Jesus. Just a few words, but very loaded words, aren't they? Back to verse 25. It was 9 in the morning when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from the distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up from Jerusalem, with him to Jerusalem, were also there. So, what do we make sense? How do we make sense of this story? Jesus challenges us to examine our hearts. He offers inner peace through an encounter with him. And however good we try, we'll never reach his standard. But now we see what comes of Jesus after that teaching. And the disciples are devastated. The one that they have chosen to follow for these 3 years has now had the life sucked out of him there on the cross, and he's dead on that cross of wood. However, it's not the end of the story. To find the end of the story, you'll have to come back tomorrow. But let me just point out to you the significance of this story by looking at one verse or 2 verses that one other person called Paul wrote sometime later. He was one of these Jewish leaders who had opposed Jesus. And now he had come face to face in an encounter with Jesus that changed his life. And this is what he said about the significance of Jesus' death. God presented him as a sacrifice of atonement. Atonement means reconciliation, making the two one. God presented him as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in his blood, in his death. He did this to demonstrate his justice so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. So Paul is saying here, this death of Christ is significant because it deals with both these problems, or both these characteristics of God. He's just, he must punish sin, but he's also loving and he wants to forgive people. So when Jesus dies on the cross, he dies as a sacrifice for human beings, for people that he's created, who he wants to come into reconciliation with him, into a relationship with him. And that is the meaning of Jesus' sacrifice, Jesus' death. Jesus did not deserve to die. He committed no crime. But he was nailed to the cross so that people like you and I can be made one with him. Justice is satisfied and we can be forgiven. And that is how God can be just and forgiving. So come back tomorrow to find out the last story in this series. Thank you.